Hi students, welcome to Spanish-English Interpretation Translation Certificate Program, Virtual Speaker Series Spring 2020. The Virtual Speaker Series is a joint effort by Business Applications Technology faculty Lilian de la Torre Reed, Nayeli Strong, and Margarita de la Torre, and is open to students enrolled in BAO 51, Introduction to Interpreting, BAO 57, Medical Interpreting, and BAO 58, Legal Interpreting. The guest speaker series will be presented live during BAO 51's Monday night class via Zoom from 7 to 8 p.m. from March 30th to May 4th. Please consult your instructor for instructions on how to access the recorded or live sessions. If you would like more information about our certificate program, please visit the website www.sag.edu/VA. Here's the lineup of the speakers. Ricardo Jimenez is a former sports publicist and sports editor for La Opinión Spanish language newspaper. He covered many NFL, NBA, and many other sports for 30 years. The last 15 years, he worked in the sports boxing industry. He's going to share with SAG students interpreting techniques, cultural nuances, and memorization techniques. He's a graduate of Cal State Fullerton. Alejandro Maciel is the editorial director of Los Angeles Times en Español and will share with SAG students news media coverage in times of COVID-19 and the challenges of translating and interpreting in the newsroom. Jasmine Ortega returns to SAC for the second time after a very popular presentation in 2019, just months after she completed months of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada, over 2,600 miles, a journey filled with discipline and resilience that inspire many of her students. She will share her experience in her new job as Deputy Press Secretary for the Department of Insurance. She's a former Southern California liaison for the Department of Education, and she's also a former press secretary for the mayor of Los Angeles. Also returning to SAC is a very popular speaker. This is the third time he'll be sharing with SAC his experiences as a court interpreter. In 2013, Omar Contreras took the oral examination set forth by the California Judicial Council for court interpreters, and he passed the certified court interpreting exam during his first attempt. He's a Spanish certified court interpreter and an administrative hearing interpreter, medical interpreter as well. He is based in Orange County. The goal of the speaker series is for industry experts in legal, medical, government, education, and media to share their work experiences with the aims of increasing the employability of our certificate program students while promoting their career success. We thank you in advance for your participation. So sit back and enjoy our virtual presentations. Welcome to tonight's presentation by Mr. Ricardo Jimenez. He was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, and his family migrated to the United States at an early age. He attended East LA College and graduated from Cal State Fullerton with a degree in business management. Fresh out of college in 1984, Jimenez started working at La Opinión, covering the professional basketball and football beats, rising very quickly to become one of the most well-known Hispanic football experts in the country, as he participated in local and national radio broadcasts throughout the United States. Jimenez traveled the nation covering both the Los Angeles Raiders and Lakers for over 15 years and expanding his knowledge of other sports such as tennis, baseball, boxing, and soccer. He was recruited to do play-by-play for the preseason Raiders football games and blow-by-blow commentator for KCAL Fight Night on Los Angeles local Channel 9. His work on those telecasts garnered him 3 local Emmys, and his writing won him a Sportscaster of the Year honor from the World Boxing Organization. As a writer, he covered 10 consecutive Super Bowls, 5 NBA Finals, 1 World Series, and countless of World Championship fights. We're very pleased to have Mr. Jimenez with us this evening. Go ahead.
I used to cover the what they call the Anglo sports, which was the NFL, the NBA, some tennis. So I spoke to a lot of English-speaking athletes, like the Lakers, Magic Johnson, James Worthy, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So obviously when I spoke to them in English. I would record them. I would translate it and do a transcript of what they said, and then just translate it from there. So, there was not really much to it other than just trying to get what they were saying and stay true to what they were saying.
And growing up, were you tell us a little bit about your fluency of the language? I know you were born in Chihuahua, and then was Spanish your native language? And how old were you when you learned the English language?
Yes, Spanish was my first, is my first language. Uh, I was 10 years old when I came to the United States. I was in Mexico. I was in the fifth grade. I just started fifth grade, and when I came over here, of course, I had no knowledge of the language, so I was put in a second grade level uh, for my English, and
Mhm.
that's reading the run, Dick, run, Jane, those little cartoons, books. That's how I started doing it. Of course,
Mhm.
in Spanish, we always had a love for reading in my home. We love the newspapers, magazines, and I just followed it here. And when I came to the United States, I continued to read newspapers in English here, and that's how I learned most of my English, by reading the newspapers, especially the sports pages, and
Mhm.
the magazines, the Sports Illustrated, the sports magazines, uh, and books. I read a lot of autobiography while growing up. I love reading about historical figures uh, and sports figures. So my knowledge of the sports comes from all those all reading about the history of all the sports.
So before you went into the world of boxing, you mentioned you covered the Lakers. I know you covered the Lakers for over a decade and the Raiders when they were in LA. So all of that, you had the fact sheets and the press releases and all the events were in English, correct? So you had to translate on the spot for your how did you learn the terminology, or how did you get that knowledge, obtain that knowledge for because it was a daily and you had to report on it on the spot on a deadline.
Most of the for most of the sports, a lot of the language is the same. Baseball strikes, I mean, outs, they're the same. In football, in the NFL, we had to get a little more creative, finding the names of the positions, like the quarterback, mariscal de campo, the running back, portabalones. So you kind of invented the language a little bit. You that you believe carry some of the same uh, meaning as the
Mhm.
English version. Same thing with the teams. It was the Chargers, los Cargadores, the Raiders, los Incursores, the Cowboys, los Vaqueros, uh,
I didn't even know the names in English, in Spanish.
Lakers, los Laguneros. Uh, we never had, there's other guys that we never, other teams that we have no names for, like the Clippers. Who knows what they are in Spanish? Maybe it was just the Clippers. But there's a lot of things that, like, they call the basketball is a game of runs, they call it. And in Mexico, or my language is based in Mexican, it's called ráfagas. So there was a game of ráfagas. Uh, Same thing with the pitcher, being perfecto.
Mhm.
Los lanzamientos, the throwing of the pitchers. Uh, there's no such thing as a ball. If it's a ball or a strike, same thing. Some things just never get translated. But it
So,
was
mhm.
very straightforward. Most of that in the newspaper business, everything was very straightforward. And even though you had, like, after a game, you were on a deadline and you had to translate what the coaches or the players said about the game, it was a lot easier than actually doing it, live, where I would do later on in my career.
So moving on with your live events, when you transitioned from La Opinion, I know you were recruited by Bob Arum, who is one of the top owners of the top company in boxing. And that's when you left La Opinion. How long have you been in La Opinion? And then when you went to Top Rank, you were there for almost 15 years. What was your translation or interpreting duties there? Because you were the Hispanic media director, correct?
Yes, I became the voice of the company, the Spanish voice of Top Rank. and later on the Spanish, the English voice of all the major boxers that they had. They had a very rich trajectory or tradition of having Mexican fighters, but they also had Puerto Ricans. They also had Colombians. So there was a lot of nuances to the language. There's some, Puerto Ricans speak real fast, and they use their own little language. They have their own little way of saying things. And I had to learn all of that, what they meant by el algarete, like, just everything that's happening too quick. Está algarete, it's going crazy. Or se van en la guagua, in the bus. Just learning different things, nuances of their language. Está todo seteado. Everything's all set. Everything's to the point. There was a lot of things in Puerto Rico, basically because of the tourist industry. A lot of people speak Spanish, but a lot of words get translated or not translated, but is used as a means of communicating with themselves. So, if somebody says, ya estoy listo, they always say, yo estoy ready. They was like, they use the word ready, but, I would try to translate estoy listo, but everybody knew what they meant. But, what I tried to do in the newspaper, we stayed more to what they were saying. The translation was more literal than anything. But in the boxing, when I became part of the boxers' camps and part of the boxing industry, I tried to give it a flavor, because some of those guys, like if you have a guy like Travieso Arce, Jorge Travieso Arce, who's a very funny guy, I tried to blend their humor into what they were saying, so people will understand that he was being funny or he was just kidding. And other guys were not, like Miguel Cotto, who's very serious boxer, very serious when he spoke. He was, we tried to stay in that mode. He's a serious guy, so I just try to do the best I can so people will understand. Try to get some of the feeling.
And talking about doing the not literal translation, I know there was a controversy. I remember back in the day because there was a fight. I think it was Julio Cesar Chavez, where not you, but the other translator for the pay-per-view had translated something, and he was so offended. I don't even remember what it was, but he didn't do the right translation on TV. So
well, you try to be diplomatic on what they say. Some guys, like when you have like a guy like Barrera, Marco Antonio Barrera, and Eric Morales, who hated each other, they would really go after each other in Spanish, but it's hard to do it in English. But people realized that they didn't like each other, so I would try to keep it, honest on the things that they were saying. Keep it, they didn't like each other. So you try to keep that in there, but you also try to, clean it up a little bit. You don't want to make, say things that you really, kids are hearing what they're saying and that kind of thing. Of course, if you speak both languages, it doesn't matter. But, you try to keep it as clean as you can, or try not to antagonize the fighters. I remember that what you're talking about was a Puerto Rican guy was doing a translation of Julio Cesar Chavez, in which he said that he quit. He goes, "Te rendiste, ¿por qué te dejaste?" He goes, "Hey, I never quit." Chavez is going, "I never quit. The corner stopped the fight. I didn't stop it. I didn't quit." But, he antagonized him. And that's what you don't want to do with fighters. Fighters try to stay honest. If they try to stay, they like it when you stay honest with them. Like I said, like someone like Arce, who's a very funny guy, and they asked him once, how come he didn't speak English? Well, he didn't like to speak English or learn to speak English. He said, "Why? I think Ricardo was fine just by me. I think he's just as funny as I am. I think people think I'm funnier, but I know they think a lot more smarter than I am when he translates for me."
So you make them look nice and diplomatic. Okay. So for example, for the press conferences, did you get a script? How did you prepare for that? Because those are not scripted, or are they?
No, they're not. They're not. But you also get to know the fighters. You spend time with them. They are, honestly, they don't, the same questions are being asked of the fighters every time. There's very little changes. How do you feel about this? What's next? So I already know what they're gonna answer before they even answer. I already know what their answer is because I spend so much time with them. Someone like Miguel Cotto, I was there when he signed his first professional contract, right through his whole 15, 20-year career. I was there with him every step of the way. I spent a lot of time with him, eating, having dinner, going to his training camp, spending time with his family. So I know what he's thinking when people are asking him about stuff. I know what his answer is gonna be. So that's a little advantage I have over everybody that, they go, oh, that was pretty fast. You knew. Well, I already know what they're gonna answer because he's been answering the same question for the past 3 weeks.
Okay, so that helps. So it helps to know your source and your client and who you're working with. Okay.
Correct.
So you also mentioned, you did the live interview sometimes on the ring after some of the fights, but before that, before you worked with Top Rank, you also did something for the local Channel 9, KCAL. You did the play-by-play. Was that also live? You did the play-by-play for boxing for KCAL Channel 9. How did you prepare for that?
That was those are a little more structured. We know what the breaks are gonna come. They would say, oh, we're gonna break on this round. We're gonna go to the corner. Be ready to what they're gonna say. But again, we do fighter meetings with these guys because it helps the telecast, but it also helps me to translate what they're saying in the corner. I know what they're trying to do by spending time with the boxers. So I knew what they were. When we went to a corner, I know what to expect. So it made it a lot easier. But it does a lot more structure to it. We'd have to do voiceovers for the commercials. In English, they would tape them, but in Spanish, they couldn't do them. So I would have to translate live as they're doing them. But I did have that in my hand. I did translate them before the show would start. I would translate them. I would have them in my hand, and that would make it a lot easier.
Okay, and also you mentioned already how you work with the Puerto Rican, you work with obviously the Mexican up-and-coming boxers, but you also mentioned some from Colombia, and I think there was always some from Argentina. What was working with them? What kind of colloquial? How did you prepare to learn? You already talked about the colloquial language, very specific, the cultural nuances to the Puerto Ricans. What can you comment on the other nationalities, like Colombians, Argentinians, or, were there any challenges whatsoever?
Yeah, there always are because like I said, spend a lot of time. I spend a lot of time with Mexican boxers, obviously, because we had a lot more Mexicans, Puerto Ricans. Once in a while, a Colombian, an Argentinian. So yeah, you learn. You have to learn what they're trying to say. But like I said, I try to stay to what the feeling of it is, not so much literally. I think literal is tough to do literal because as you're going through it, sometimes it makes no sense or it just what they're saying doesn't accomplish what the boxer is trying to say.
So how about the other way around? How about for the non-Spanish speakers? Because I know you traveled a couple times to the Philippines and you were also working with Pacquiao. So what was it like to translate or to work? For example, what Pacquiao was saying, you had to translate it back to Spanish and feed it to the Hispanic media worldwide, correct?
Yeah, it's like a lot of I spend a lot of time with Manny Pacquiao, with his team. I knew what they were asking. I knew what his answers were gonna be. That made it a lot easier. It's always you have the insight on what they're trying to say, what they want to say. It can be difficult, especially when you're not used to it, because a lot of the stuff. One time in Mexico, we did a press conference with Mr. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, who was doing a fight, Margarito Pacquiao, and we went to Mexico City. And they go, can you translate for him? And I said, sure. So he starts speaking in English, but I'm not used to doing that. So I had a really hard time translating from English to Spanish. It was a very difficult for me. And I halfway through it, I just really, I lost all my composure. I don't even know what I was translating in English or Spanish. And everybody goes, wait a minute, what's going on? I go, I'm just not used to going that way. I'm used to doing it from Spanish to English. I wasn't used to doing English to Spanish. And that makes it more difficult.
Even though you're completely fluent in English, but was it just because you were asked like on the spot to do it, and you?
Live television, 40 million people watching it in live television in Mexico. It's a little tough. By now I've living in the United States 15, 20 years. So my Spanish is not as, I didn't feel as strongly as I did about my English.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. What would you recommend? I know in the past you've spoken to my students, but what do you recommend to students that want to pursue careers in interpreting or other industries, not just, in terms of how can they be competitive? I know one of the students, Ramon, sent a question and said specifically, how do sports channels or promoters choose and hire interpreters and translators? So can you talk about just in general, and then the sports industry, how they would, what skills do they need?
It was interesting, in boxing, it's a very niche sport. So it's, it's very small community. So there's not that many, that they don't like to spend money. So like people like Showtime, they just pick a person from the camp who speaks English and translate for us. They don't care if you're good at it or not. They just want to do it. Showtime did it for a lot of years with nobody. They didn't hire anybody. Then they did hire someone the last few years that I was there. ESPN does the same thing. They don't really hire anybody. HBO did hire people, and they hired them from ESPN Sports Deportes, because they had I believe there was a contract there that all those fights could go in Spanish on ESPN Deportes later, after they were on HBO. So they could use someone from there and not pay them. It was part of the deal. So it's hard to get a job like that unless you know somebody way up there, someone that you really, like, even though I did all those years for my fighters, I never got hired to do it. It was part of my job. Just with top rank, it was part of my job.
So how about for other just in general, for other industries, like what kind of techniques do you need to have? I know you did written translations for many years for La Opinión, but also for consecutive and live interpreting. Like what helped you? I know you already talked about, you already knew them and you knew the terminology, but were there some particular techniques? Because there's so many distractions in boxing and everybody's talking at the same time. Like, how do you stay focused?
It's like I said, it's just a matter of experience. When I started, it was very difficult, but it's just the experience. It just gives you, it's like anything. The more you do it, the easier it gets. The more you're into it, the more you spend time with doing it, the better you get at it. It's, like they say, how did you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. How did you get to that level? Practice, practice, practice. It's all about being able to do it. It's hard to get those kind of jobs, but, once you get it, it's hard to get you out of there.
So what can you share some of your best experience that you have? Like, what are your cherished moments just from the boxing, working in the boxing industry, or maybe just in general in working in sports? Like, what are your aha moments, if you want to call them?
Well, I got to, because of my newspaper experience, I got to cover NBA Finals, World Series. I was there the last time the Dodgers won a World Series in 1988. I was there when I covered 10 Super Bowls. I went to 10 Super Bowls. Those are always special. That's the week leading up to a Super Bowls are always very special. Spending a week in that city, just spending time, in that atmosphere is something very special. And in boxing, it's just, like I talk about Miguel Cotto because I was there the day he signed his first professional contract, and I hope to be there next year when he gets to the Hall of Fame. Very few people have that opportunity to do that. Know a fighter from the day he signs his professional contract that he makes it to a Hall of Fame career. And the last 3 years, I had Eric Morales, I had Juan Manuel Marquez, and Marco Antonio Barrera make it to the Boxing Hall of Fame. And I worked with all three of them for a long time. I know all three of them very well. And, even though with Marquez, I think I was his fourth professional fight when I started with him. With Morales, it was his 10th professional fight. And with Barrera, I also saw his debut.
Oh, we lost.
So, starting when they start from nothing to get to where they get, to the, someone like Cotto, especially, that became such a great big star. And you remember when he started. I mean, I remember the first time he was gonna fight in Texas, and we had a lot of problems with his opponent. He was overweight. They didn't want to fight him. The uncle at the time, Cotto's uncle, was giving us a hard time about the fighter, his opponent. You live through a lot of crazy things. I mean, with Cotto, his family, his father, his uncle, a lot of internal family problems. But then they get the recognition. He became a big star. He became a millionaire. He still has his money. He invested it very well, and he worked very hard to obtain what he got. And it's always good to see.
So right now that you mentioned controversy and family, was Oscar de la Hoya, for how long were you working with him?
I actually got to when Top Rank, he had already left Top Rank when I got there to Top Rank. So I only got to the last couple of fights. He was already had his own company, his own promotional company. Although he was doing shows with Top Rank, he was not really a Top Rank fighter. He was actually a partner with Top Rank. But I was part of that one fight with Feroz Vargas, Fernando Vargas, the press conference where they got pushed. They got into a shoving match, and I went down and I broke my leg. Just part of doing business, I guess.
That was the scuffle that caused you a broken knee, and then you were part of the news. Correct?
That's right. Right in the middle of that.
So in your how many years have you been in the sports industry? Maybe 25, 30? How many years?
30 years.
So in your 30 years, how have you seen in terms of language? How have you seen the networks evolve? How have you seen the coverage in terms of, because we just had an article talking about Latinos and the advertisement geared in Spanish towards Latino. Have you seen more of that? Have you seen like the major leagues, focusing more on the Hispanic market, on Latinos, trying to get the message out in Spanish? In your time when you started, were there such thing as fact sheets in Spanish for the NBA or the NFL or anything like that? I mean, did you see a change throughout the years?
Oh, without a doubt. The NFL became a very international league. They still do games in Spain, and they're very huge in Mexico. They play once a year in Mexico, maybe twice, I think now. So yeah, without a doubt, they have a big in that market. They're very huge in the Hispanic market. They do a lot of promotional work. The NFL, the NBA. The NBA still does nights where they, like I said, they wear those shirts that says Laguneros or Guerreros, the Warriors. They without a doubt, it's been a total difference. And ESPN Deportes has grown from right when I remember it was just one guy or two guys, following events, to having actually a network where they actually have a sports night, you know, an actual national sports show and sports shows. Actually, they have sports shows. And yeah, they've grown incredibly, more than I ever remember. Every team now, probably every single NFL team and NBA team has Spanish play-by-play station, which they didn't have it when I was there. You know, maybe Miami would have one, maybe Dallas would have one, San Francisco, but nothing like they do now. Every, you know, even Portland, North Carolina, the Carolinas, everybody has one now. All those have radio shows in Spanish, which they never did before.
So I know you didn't cover the Dodgers as much, but in terms of the Dodgers coverage, would you, during the time that, what was that, the Mexican famous Dodger player? What is his name?
Fernando Valenzuela.
Fernando Valenzuela, yes. During the time that he was there, you seen, is there a difference? I mean, has the Dodgers been more involved with the Hispanic community just because of the geographic of the, you know, their team?
First ones, of course, with Jaime Jarrin, who does the play-by-play. He's been doing it for 60 years. You know, he's sensational. He's from Ecuador, but he's a wonderful, wonderful man. I had the privilege of working with him a few fights, and I met him, and he's a very nice man. And they were the first one. You know, Peter O'Malley, when he came to Los Angeles, made it a focus of his team to be part of that community. It was important for them to be part of the Hispanic community, the Mexican community, and they still are. They're still some of the best. They still have Mexican players. You know, whenever they have a Mexican, they have those Viva los Dodgers every, I think every Sunday. They still have those festivals of Viva los Dodgers. They always try to have at least one Mexican player there in their team. It's important to them to do like Hispanics, you know, like Cubans or whatever, you know, Puerto Ricans, whatever they can get a good, it's to them, it's important. I remember that even just a few years back, Adrian Gonzalez, who's from Tijuana, who's from San Diego, he was one of the first players to put a tilde in his last name, in his uniform, which they never done before. But he used the tilde, el acento, in his last name, followed by Quique Hernandez. And, you know, a lot of the players decided to use a tilde because it was important to them. It's important to the community.
I didn't even know that. I got to use that for my class. Okay, so I got to look it up. To not put Valenzuela on the spot, but I think you mentioned in my last class when you came last year that there was an anecdote or something of that sort. I think someone asked you if you had met him, and because you had to do like a special supplement during the time you were in La Opinión, and you had to interview him. What was that experience like?
Actually, you know, when like I said, the Dodgers have always been a forefront about, you know, Spanish language and promoting their players. In their, they have their weekly, or I guess every homestand has a program. And in that program, they decided to do a story on Fernando Valenzuela, but they could have, you know, assigned it to anyone and then put a translator. And they decided one day that, hey, let's do it in Spanish. Let's put him with a Spanish-speaking writer, and then he can translate the story to English. And I was assigned that story. And the first time I went to see him, he didn't want to do it. He was a very difficult guy. He was very quiet. He didn't like talking to the press. He didn't like talking to anybody. It wasn't just me, but it was hard to get him to speak. And the first couple of times that I went to interview him, he wouldn't do it. And it took me like 3 tries. And then I said, you know what? I don't need to do this. It's the Dodgers that want to do it. And I told one of the Dodgers pitchers there, I believe Bobby Welch, the late Bobby Welch. And I was talking to him, and I said, you know, I don't have to do this. I mean, they just told me, you know, it'd be nice to have him do story in Spanish and then translate it. And he said, oh, I'll take care of it. And Bobby Welch, who grew up, they were friends they started in the minor leagues together. So they were very close friends. So he got him, and he brought him up to the dugout and made him do the interview with me. but he was a very difficult man to do an interview with because he just very quiet. He didn't like doing them. But I still have that book.
Well, thank you so much. Is there any other comments, perhaps something that we didn't cover, or if there's any other students? I believe we have about 10 minutes. If there's if some of you want to send me a question in the chat, any questions, or Ricardo, perhaps something, any last thoughts that you would like to just recommend to the students in terms of they're going in different careers, some media, some court, legal, medical, educational, somewhere want to work in government. What is one or maybe a couple of suggestions, again, like you said the importance of colloquial, what would you tell my students?
Well, I always say, it's like everything, you practice, practice, practice. You have to learn the language, whatever you're translating. Try to get documented, read as much about it as you can, learn as much as you can about the language. Even now, when I used to write for La Opinión, the editors, as you know, were from Spain or Argentina, and they use a different. Sometimes even the news is the tilde where it goes, or to use them or not to use them. In Mexico, we don't use a tilde or when their letters are in capital letters, but in a lot of countries they do. So that was always you have to learn when and when not to use them, and just everything. Just document yourself as much as you can.
What about in terms of pursuing higher education? I know you are the first generation in your family. You and your sister and your brother to have a college degree. Your two daughters also attend college. What about the importance of a higher education? I mean, how did it help you? Because I know you have a degree in business from Cal State Fullerton. Did you ever thought when you were in school that you would end up working in the sports industry?
So what did I always wanted to do? I always was looking to do something in sports. I went to school because the education, it was important to our family. It's always been important in our family, education, and that's what we did. You went to college, you learn. And my father used to say, me voy a madrear 12 horas yo en la fábrica para que tú te madrees 5 horas en un escritorio. So so you do this so that you don't work as hard or you can work as hard for not as long as period of time. You learn. The education, higher education, gives you an opportunity to do things a lot faster, a lot easier than if you have to work 12 hours a day in a factory, which both my parents did for a long time.
Anybody has a question for Mr. Jimenez before we let him, we send him off? If not, then I would just like to close just by saying thank you again for your availability to be present in our class virtually. We would have liked for this to be open to the other classes, but unfortunately, because I explained to you earlier, because of the confidentiality, we couldn't allow for other students, but I recorded the session. And I thank you. If anybody has any other comments, this is the time to write them in the chat. If not, thank you very much, Ricardo. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to the Santa Ana College students.
Okay, thank you very much. Hope I help you guys.
Yes, you have. They're saying that thank you very much. They appreciate you coming to our class. What an honor. Someone likes Chihuahua a lot. So yeah, so thank you for sharing. I know, like you said, the sports, I wanted to have this opportunity for you to share with my students, because you also did a lot of written translations as well as consecutive and simultaneous. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time, Ricardo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.